We're calling to order the June 20th, 2011 meeting of the Cape Cod Commission, and I'll ask the Vice Chair to please call the roll.
Barnstable, Royden Richardson.
Present.
Bourne, Michael Blanton. Brewster, Elizabeth Taylor.
Present.
Chatham, Lynn Pluffner.
Present.
Dennis, Richard Roy.
Present.
Eastham, Joy Brookshire. Falmouth, Mario Di Gregorio. Harwich, Robert Bradley.
Here.
Mashpee, Ernest Virgilio. Orleans, Peter Monger. Provincetown, Austin Knight. Sandwich, Joanne O'Keefe. Truro, Peter Graham, present. Wellfleet, Roger Putnam.
Present.
Yarmouth, John McCormick.
Present.
County Commissioner, Mary Pat Flynn. Minority Representative, John Harris.
Present.
Native American Representative, Mark Harding. Governor's appointee, Herb Olson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Now is the time for public comment for those people who have things to say that are not on the agenda. If you want to speak on something that's on the agenda, there will be an opportunity to do so.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Doherty, and I am the chair of the Barnstable County Commissioners. Mary Pat Flynn sends her apologies. She was kind of concerned about the snowstorm tomorrow and Saturday is the Massachusetts Municipal Association annual meeting, and she will be attending that as well as attending as a board member for the insurance plan. But in any case, I'm here to speak at public comment for a particular reason. Communication is very important among the different elements within our culture, but it's also very important with regard to the communications among members of various county boards. When I served on this board, the Cape Cod Commission, I did that proudly for 6 years, and at that time, I was able to use that service to communicate to the members of the Assembly, as well as the other county commissioners, as to the important work that you do. The thing that's missing, I believe, in many of the actions that are taken here at the Cape Cod Commission, is to transfer or to give to the other members that will be looking at the votes that you take some understanding as to the reasons why you took a particular vote. Now, when we had the Blue Ribbon Committee that looked at the ability of Cape Cod Commission members to communicate to their boards of selectmen, it was clear that as long as you were not announcing any votes that you would take, that you could make reports. Also, it was clear that after you had taken votes, you were at liberty to communicate the reasons for your stands to other members of the community, and in this case, most importantly, to the members of the Assembly, especially the ones in the towns that you live in, as to why you took a stand that you did. The committee system on the Cape Cod Commission is one that looks at matters much more in depth than my experience with both bodies, both the Assembly and the Cape Cod Commission. And I think that the Assembly member from the town that you represent would be well served if you were to communicate with him or her with regard to why you took a particular position, whether it was for or against a matter that would be coming like a DCPC before the Assembly at a later time. To that end, I have asked to pass out two things. One, a booklet to all of you, in case you might not have seen it, as to what the various departments of county government do, and a email list for all of the Assembly members and the commissioners in case you want to get a hold of us directly to discuss any matter of interest. I hope that you do follow that, and I think it would be very important, and I think that the The voters and the constituents here on Cape Cod would be well served if you were to communicate your actions to the Assembly in future time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You didn't get a copy of this?
Yeah, they already have copies.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Paper we get a lot of, Roger.
All right, thank you. Are there any other public comments on items other than the items that appear in the agenda? All right. The Executive Director's report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a lot of people that would like to speak today, so I'll keep it brief with just 3 informational items. One is to let the members of the commission know that our partnership with IBM is off to a great start, and we're going to have our first workshop next Wednesday and Thursday to discuss the Smart Cape initiative. There'll be more to follow on that with an official report due on February 15th. Also want to point out to the members of the commission that the Craigville DCPC that you have been involved with for almost 2 years on some sense now was approved by the Assembly of Delegates last night. And so that will go forward, and those protections included therein will be applied to that important regional asset. And then finally, the League of Women Voters is holding a forum on county government on Saturday, January 28th. And I know some members were a little concerned about the title of that, which was somewhat provocative, sort of a county government, use it, lose it, reform it, or something like that along those lines. I don't think it was intended to be that derogatory. And being members of the Cape Cod Commission, we have very thick skins, and we've been fully examined more than any other organization on the Cape, repeated public examinations, the last one being the 21st Century Task Force. So I think we welcome a sort of zero-based approach to reviewing county government, who we are and what we do. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing. In fact, there are 2 public hearings on the agenda today. And I will ask the Vice Chairman if he would read the notice of the hearing of the first public hearing, the Regional Policy Proposed Amendment to Energy Section.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been asked to read both of these because they are grouped, so in the interest of time, I will read them both here, the first and the second. Hearing notice, Cape Cod Commission, 2009 Regional Policy Plan, Proposed Amendment to Energy Section, January 20th, 2011. Pursuant to the Cape Cod Commission Act, C. 1716 of the Acts of 1989, as amended, Section 8H, the Commission will conduct a public hearing on Thursday, January 20th, 2011, beginning at 3 p.m. in the 1st District Courthouse, Assembly of Delegates Chamber, Route 6, Barnstable, Mass. At this hearing, the Commission will consider proposed amendment to the Commission's Regional Policy Plan, Barnstable County Ordinance 08-14 as amended. Barnstable County Ordinance 08-14 is the 5-year revision to the Regional Policy Plan, Barnstable County Ordinance 91-6 as adopted by the Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates and the Barnstable County Commissioners. The proposed amendment consists of additional minimum performance standards in the energy section of the Regional Policy Plan. Hearing Notice 2. Hearing Notice, Cape Cod Commission, Chapter A, DRI, Enabling Regulations, Governing Review of Developments of Regional Impact Proposed Amendment, January 20th, 2011. The Cape Cod Commission Commission will conduct a public hearing on Thursday, January 20th, 2011, beginning at 3 p.m. in the 1st District Courthouse Assembly of Delegates Chamber, Route 6A, Barnstable, Mass. At this hearing, the Commission will consider proposed amendment to Chapter A, enabling regulations governing review of developments of regional impact, Barnstable County Ordinance 90-12 as amended for the purpose proposed wind energy conversion facility thresholds. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to ask our Executive Director, Mr. Ndedzwicki, to present some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what I'd like to do for the Commission members is just try to put the discussion that we're about to have in context for you. Ryan Christenberry, planner with the Cape Cod Commission, is about to make a PowerPoint presentation. But the Commission's history with wind energy goes back some time. It's certainly tremendous involvement with the Cape Wind Project, development in local model bylaws that many of the towns have used as a model for the bylaws that they have currently on the books on the local level. And finally, with the Ocean DCPC, that was a result of the Ocean Management Act and the Ocean Management Plan put forward by the state. And the charge in that plan for coastal regional planning agencies to determine appropriate scale for community wind offshore. What the Commission has not done is to enter into the issue of looking at land-based wind regulations, and we haven't done that for many reasons. A lot of that is a desire by the state in our conversations with them, and primarily conversations with local towns, that their local bylaws were sufficient in order to cover the regulation of these wind energy conversion facilities, or these wind turbines. Over a fairly short period of time, technology has changed, the scale of these structures has increased, and even the model bylaws have started to become somewhat outdated. They were really envisioned to cover more of the residential wind turbines, not the commercial scale turbines that we're seeing proposed now. The fact that we had no regulations had put us in a very difficult, if not ridiculous, situation of having large commercial wind projects trip Cape Cod Commission thresholds for review for reasons other than the turbines, for clearing of forest, for example. And the Commission having no standards on the books to actually look at those wind turbines and to measure them against. It's a result that is illogical, and we needed to remedy that. So in order to close that particular loophole that looked at projects that tripped Commission thresholds for some other reason, even though they were primarily wind projects, we put forward 3 standards to the Assembly of Delegates last month in a November-December timeframe. And that was the reason we put those 3 standards forward with no thresholds, just those standards, so that if a project tripped review for some other reason, we would at least have standards to apply to the turbines. When those proposals got in front of the Assembly of Delegates, they felt that they were insufficient. And I at the time struggled with how some regulation wasn't good enough. They would rather have none than some. But I think on some level they didn't understand that we were just trying to close that loophole. But in another way, they really wanted more. And what they wanted from the Commission is more review. They wanted us to exercise our jurisdiction to provide more review of these structures that are going up. And not only did we hear from the Assembly loud and clear, we heard from a number of citizen groups out there. We've heard from planning boards, boards of health, and other members of town administrations that prior to this did not want us to participate. And we were left with that input in a fairly short period of time, and left with what we had recognized for some time, that when you're talking about structures that can be 500+ feet tall, that it's hard to imagine that a structure of that size doesn't inherently have a regional impact and shouldn't and should be examined by the regional planning agencies, especially one with regulatory authority. So we have shown a great deal of restraint and discretion in this land-based wind turbine discussion to date. But it's clear that the Assembly wants us to act. And so we spent a great deal of time going through the Assembly's testimony and trying to discern what they wanted us to do. And I've had conversations, and it was clear that they wanted a threshold. Just standards alone were not going to be sufficient for them. And they wanted us to clarify some of the standards that we had out there that were more general in nature. And clearly, if you are going to have a threshold with a larger reach, more specificity in some of those standards was appropriate. And so I think their instincts were appropriate. And we have to understand that the Cape Cod Commission, in passing ordinances, we are a partner with the Assembly of Delegates. It requires a vote by that assembly, too. And in a certain sense, the Commission, 19 members, each with one vote, and the Assembly, 15 members with a weighted vote based on the population of the town, act in a somewhat bicameral nature to produce regional ordinances and legislation. So they are our partner, and we have to be responsive to them. And we have tried our best to do that with the new regulations that are in front of you today. But the new regulations today are completely different in purpose from the 3 standards that we put forward several months back. These are thresholds, Cape-wide regional thresholds that will apply universally across the region. They are not intended to close a gap in the regional policy plan. So they are very different, even though a lot of the language is the same. So that's what's going to be presented to you today, and that's the context that we're going to have this discussion. And the other issue that I just want to raise briefly is that this is a very emotional topic to try to discuss. And there are people on both sides of this issue that are well-intentioned, very good people. And to keep the discussion civil and on the facts and professional is the way that we as a community can try to reach consensus on this. Allegations, conspiracy theories, all the rest of that often derail otherwise informative discussions, and so I think that's enough said on that issue. We as a body have convened many controversial issues in the past, and have done a pretty good job at it, and I think that we can do that today. So we put forward for discussion in front of the the Commission today these new proposed regulations, which are a threshold and new standards for the regional policy plan. And we hope that you will consider that, and we hope that the public will consider the facts that are presented, and there'll be an opportunity for the public to give testimony, and we will respond as best we can. So this is the next step in an important process. The final thing I will say is that there's a lot of discussion about ordinances and standards and a technical bulletin. And I just want to explain to folks that the technical bulletin is a guidance document for both applicants and the Cape Cod Commission to apply the general standards that are in the ordinances. And that we're not trying to create regional zoning in any way. We're trying to create minimum performance standards to be put forward as part of the regional policy plan. And that technical bulletin will, as they always have been for 20 years, be developed once the standards have established that we have jurisdiction to do that. As part of that process, in an unprecedented way, a way that we've never done before, I have agreed with the Assembly that we would put together an advisory board to monitor the development of that technical bulletin. And that technical bulletin will involve the hiring of a consultant, an acoustical engineer, to work with the Commission to develop those guidelines going forward. And so we hope that this won't be the end of public hearing process or community involvement. It will be the beginning as we start to discuss the specifics of that bulletin and how we're going to apply these standards moving forward. So I hope that's enough explanation of the process, and at this point I'd like to turn it over to Ryan, who's going to bring you through a little bit more of this particular history and some of the specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Niedzwiecki. Ryan?
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Chair. For the record, Ryan Christenberry, planner with the Cape Cod Commission. As Paul mentioned, on November 17th, the Assembly of Delegates voted to remand the proposed minimum performance standards back to the Commission on the basis that they were not restrictive enough. The Assembly requested the Commission consider more restrictive standards as well as a DRI review threshold for land-based wind. Today, in the wake of two separate joint Cape Cod Commission Planning and Regulatory Committee meetings, I'd like to present a proposed threshold for DRI review, as well as 5 minimum performance standards for the RPP energy section, and modification to one existing community character standard pertaining to visual impacts. It was the recommendation of the Joint Planning and Regulatory Committee meeting on January 10th to adopt these standards before you today. I can make this work. Thank you. I have just a brief slide to show a little bit of background to this process. Since May of 2010, there have been 10 public meetings where a threshold and/or performance standards have been considered. Since the first of the year, the Cape Cod Commission Planning and Regulatory Committee meeting have met to discuss specifically a DRI review threshold and revised performance standards. Before you today is the Joint Committee's recommendation for the DRI review threshold, proposed as an amendment to Chapter A DRI Enabling Regulations. The threshold states that construction of any land-based wind energy conversion facility greater than 65 feet in height, including meteorological towers, measured from the natural grade of the site to the blade tip at its highest point, shall be considered as a development of regional impact. Also before you are 6 minimum performance standards, 5 of which are new, and 1 existing community character standard. The first standard is a clear area standard, which states that all wind energy conversion facilities shall maintain a clear area surrounding the base of the turbine equal to at least 1.5 times the tip height of the facility or the facility's manufacturer's fall zone setback or clear area specification, whichever is greater. The clear area setback shall be measured from the base of the turbine. Next slide. A second proposed standard is a noise standard, which is proposed as follows. All applicants for a wind energy conversion facility shall perform a noise study and fund a Cape Cod Commission-approved consultant's review of the noise study as outlined in Technical Bulletin 11-001. All wind energy conversion facilities with a maximum generating capacity equal to or greater than 1 megawatt shall maintain a setback of 3,000 feet from the nearest receptor or residentially zoned parcel unless the applicant can demonstrate through the noise study to the satisfaction of the Cape Cod Commission that there are minimal impacts to occupants within the reduced setback. All DRIs shall, after consulting with the Commission's noise consultant, prepare a plan which specifies reduced operating procedures, including decommissioning plans that address noise complaints that may arise during operation of the wind energy conversion facility. The third standard pertains to shadow flicker. All applicants for a wind energy conversion facility shall conduct a study of shadow flicker on receptors which will be affected by the proposed facility. All DRIs with shadow flicker effects affecting receptors for more than 10 hours per year shall require the applicant to submit a mitigation plan which specifies operational controls, landscaping, or other means that mitigate shadow flicker events to less than 10 hours per year for review and consideration by the Commission. Fourth standard pertains to decommissioning. Any facility that has not been operational for more than 120 consecutive days shall be dismantled and removed from the site by the owner, operator, and/or other parties as designated by the decommissioning plan, unless a written waiver is obtained for good cause shown from the Cape Cod Commission's Executive Director. The applicant shall also provide security in a form and amount satisfactory to the Cape Cod Commission. The security shall cover over the life of the facility the cost of decommissioning and removing any abandoned or damaged wind energy conversion facilities. This security shall be in place and payable to the town or commission on demand for the life of the facility. All facility DRI decisions shall contain a written decommissioning plan. The fifth standard is a municipal waiver that offers some relief to the shadow flicker and noise standards for projects less than 100 kilowatts, which is roughly the size of the county garden turbine, to give you some context. Because of the procedural, legal, and political safeguards applicable to town appropriations and the use of town-owned land, minimum performance standards E1.8 through E1.10 shall not apply to one municipal wind energy conversion facility 100 kilowatt or less on a single parcel. The sixth is, as I mentioned, an existing community character standard that we have that's been slightly modified to address visual impacts for wind energy conversion facilities. And it reads that new development shall be sited and designed to avoid adverse visual impacts to visually sensitive areas, including those protected by HPCC 1.1 and 1.2. And that's the extent of the revision to that standard. That concludes my presentation. Pardon me. There are some definitions that will also accompany both the enabling regulations and the RPP. They're listed here. Wind energy conversion facility, clear area, shadow flicker, meteorological or MET tower, municipal wind energy conversion facility, height, road, receptor, and recreational use, which actually there's a typo there. It should be public recreational area to be consistent with the language that's proposed before you. And the definition we've proposed for that is publicly owned open spaces and recreation lands and privately owned land protected by a permanent conservation or recreation restriction or owned by a private conservation organization. This includes open spaces and recreation lands to which town residents regularly have access or which is accessible to members of nonprofit organizations whose membership is open to the general public. This is a modification of an existing exclusionary zone definition that the Martha's Vineyard Commission has applied in their study of land-based wind. Next steps will involve, as Paul mentioned, a technical bulletin and a working group to fill in the components of that bulletin, which we've outlined in your packets for you today. I've kept my presentation brief, knowing that there'd be a considerable amount of public testimony, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions that somebody would like to ask at this point? Would you please come over to the microphone and give your name if you have a question? Yes, I see your hand.
Bruce McPherson.
No, you'll have to come to the microphone.
Sorry. Bruce McPherson from Hyannis. Is there any grandfathering to cover existing turbines that are already in place?
The proposed regulations would not apply to any existing turbines or turbines that have already pulled applications or that are already permitted.
Are there any other questions?
Yes. Hi. Liz Argo from Orleans. The recreation definition, if you could help me understand in a for instance aspect, on a public field where it's not an active area but it's considered part of the recreation zone, would that then be ineligible for the wind turbine?
I know. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Are there other, excuse me, does somebody want to respond to that?
I believe that is correct. It would be ineligible under the definition as proposed.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Tom Garino from Bourne, and just a quick question. At a recent public hearing in Bourne relative to the shadow flicker, one of the experts that testified at that hearing indicated that a 6-hour window of over a course of a year of shadow flicker was something above 6 hours would be something that would be considered bothersome to neighborhoods or other folks there. So my question really is, where did the 10-hour number come from versus the 6-hour that I heard, at the public hearing that was held in Bourne?
I think that's a good question that you could probably ask for a lot of different components of different thresholds for wind turbines right now. But the 10-hour, when you look at several different shadow flicker models that are presented, they're presented in ranges of 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and then they can go on all the way up to ranges of 90 plus. The committee discussed several different levels, and 10 is where we arrived. 6 is not something that was presented through our deliberations with the committee.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next, we have comments from federal, state.
Could I ask a question?
Yes. This will be the last question, and when you give testimony, you can ask a question, and have any others.
Hi, my name's Eric Bibler from Save Our Seashore in Wellfleet. My question is, as you know, we've provided the Commission with a considerable amount of evidence from researchers, acoustic technicians, medical studies, including folks like Acoustic Ecology Today and Acoustic Research, stating recommendations, including many countries now and health authorities, for a minimum setback of 2 kilometers from wind turbines. That's about 6,200 feet, give or take. So my question is, how did the Cape Cod Commission, what authority did the Cape Cod Commission refer to determine that 3,000 feet was an adequate minimum in the absence of any research that I'm aware of that suggests that is adequate?
Thank you. Who would like to respond to that question?
But the issue of a lot of these standards, whether it's 6 hours or 30 hours on flicker and arriving at 10 and the 3,000-foot setback, are a result of a number of studies that we've looked at. We've looked at some of the European studies and some of the proposals that are out there. 3,000 foot residential setback at this point is one of the most conservative setbacks that's been suggested and will be in place. And so that's come from a particular study that looked at a number of issues that included real estate values as well as some public health issues. So there are a number of studies out there. I think these are the kind of things that we would look at in more depth with technical experts that would be part of the technical bulletin process going forward.
I just asked that you identify the particular study so that we could review it.
We'll make all of that available.
Thank you. All right, next will be comments from federal, state, or local officials.
For the record, my name is Bill Doherty. I'm the chairman of the Barnstable County Commissioners. I'm also a board member of the Cape Cod Regional Transportation Authority, which has a operating wind tower, which has been very successful. I'm chairman of the Harwich Housing Authority, as well as a member of the Harwich Utility Committee. I'll make copies of this available to the members of the Commission. The proposed minimum standard will hinder the development of wind turbine projects on Cape Cod, and the thresholds are contrary to existing successful wind turbine projects in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the United States. With regard to the clear area, the establishment of a clear area 1.5 times the tip height is not practical and is not supported by scientific or industrial standards. The Massachusetts Maritime Academy, the Town of Barnstable Wastewater Treatment Turbine, the Country Garden Turbine all exist and do have a clear areas of this nature. The 1.8 megawatt turbine in Hull coexists with residential and commercial structures with a much smaller clear area. And by the way, I personally visited Hull and in that neighborhood and stood at a house that was within the shadow of that turbine and talked to a woman that lived in that house who said that that turbine did not cause any significant problem. She did, however, say that during the time that the turbine was being proposed in Hull, there was much opposition to it. But once it came in, and once its contribution to the reduction of costs within that community was seen, it has been accepted by the community. And that is the second turbine that Hull has. So therefore, in my opinion, a clear area of this size is unnecessary. With regard to noise, the proposed minimum performance standard requires all wind turbines greater than 1.5 megawatts to maintain a setback of 3,000 feet from the nearest residence unless the applicant can demonstrate through the noise study to the satisfaction of the Cape Cod Commission that there are minimal impacts to residents within the reduced buffer. After spending my time as part of a research group looking at the ability of people to hear and discriminate in noisy environments, audio information that was useful, I came away with the conviction that a person can focus attention and hear a signal that another who was uncued to that information could not. Therefore, in my opinion, and others, the subjective nature of hearing makes it difficult, if not impossible, to determine a threshold of irritation as a minimal impact in an absolutely objective way. So the state of Massachusetts has established noise standards for wind turbine projects that require no increase of 10 decibels above ambient at the property line can occur as a result of the turbine. Putting the Cape Cod Commission in the position of determining whether or not there are minimal impacts to residents within the reduced buffer is impossible because no scientific standards exist and will lead to arbitrary, subjective decision-making, which may vary based upon the circumstances that surround the project, rather than an objective one grounded in verifiable objective standards. In this case, the state of Massachusetts has established a noise standard that is acceptable, and the Cape Cod Commission, based upon the empirical evidence, is not. Decommissioning. I support the need for a decommissioning plan for wind turbines. However, this is a local responsibility and should rest with each town and not the Cape Cod Commission. The requirement for a security deposit should also be a local town requirement, payable to the town and not required and payable to the Cape Cod Commission. I left out the part where I'm on the Cape Light Compact Board, did I? Okay, good. All right, the action that I'm asking you to do. I ask you to revise the noise standard to conform to state standards and reduce the clear area to be in conformance with evidence gained from existing turbines on Cape Cod and Massachusetts for appropriate size. Failure to do this, in my opinion, will effectively eliminate land-based wind turbines as a significant factor in providing a revenue source for the towns, a reduction of the contribution to global warming that comes from fossil fuel generation because an alternative would exist, and for those businesses that are struggling to meet the rising cost of energy, a reliable method of predicting and thereby controlling them. And one final comment. Some of us in here are veterans, and right now I don't know of any soldier that's been placed at risk in order to protect a wind tower. But I sure know a lot of them that are placed at risk in order to protect fossil fuel assets that are outside of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other federal, state, or local officials?
I am here representing the executive director of the state's Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Martha Broad. I am a senior project manager at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and would like to enter into the record a letter from our executive director, Patrick Cloney, regarding the amendments being discussed today to the energy section of the regional policy plan and to Chapter A, enabling regulations. Dear Commission members, as Executive Director, which is Patrick Cloney, I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the proposed amendments. MassCEC is the state entity dedicated to developing the clean energy sector in Massachusetts. Through our programs and other state policies, we are supporting the development of renewable energy projects. Massachusetts is taking concrete steps to increase sources of emissions-free, locally based energy generation. We support the responsible siting of wind energy by requiring rigorous feasibility studies that not only assess wind resources and potential economic benefits, but also assess potential impacts from wind turbines, including noise, safety, and shadow flicker. Objectively evaluating and planning for these issues early in the process leads to projects that will be considered successful not only by their proponents, but by their host communities. The standards presently put forward by the Commission would grant siting review for all wind projects with a height greater than 65 feet, with the exception of municipal projects of less than 100 kilowatts. MassCEC looks forward to continuing to work with the Commission throughout its process to establish appropriate regional wind siting standards for these projects. The Commission should strongly consider a refinement of the proposed standards so that they can be developed based on sound technical principles and broad stakeholder input. Mass CEC feels that the proposed standards present far-reaching regulations without a basis for justifying these standards and may have unintended consequences. After review, we have some concerns with the proposed standards. As an example, we are concerned how the wording regarding the noise standard, the wording minimal impacts to occupants would be interpreted and applied. We're also concerned that extensive siting review would be required for Met towers, which, as some of you may know, are temporary structures that host wind monitoring equipment. As one of the first Massachusetts regional governmental bodies to address land-based wind siting, it is especially important that the Commission take a considered approach to the establishment of wind siting standards. Mass CEC urges the Commission to make this process a highly deliberative one and to take a closer look at the technical information before finalizing the standards and sending this to the Cape Cod Commission Barnstable Assembly of Delegates. Mass CEC would welcome the opportunity to work with the Commission to establish responsible wind siting standards and develop technical guidance in applying those standards. We're actively identifying, reviewing, and applying the latest national and international developments in wind energy to the growing portfolio of proposed projects in the Commonwealth. We ask that the Commission work with the state and Mass CEC to identify, evaluate, and apply the most objective, evidence-based information to the development of regional standards. We believe wind power can be responsibly developed on the Cape, and that a well-conceived analysis-based process for evaluating projects is an appropriate first step in that process. Sincerely, Patrick Cloney, Executive Director. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also.
And who should I actually submit this to? Okay, thank you.
Any other representatives, federal, state, or local level?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Richard Elrick. I am the Energy Coordinator for both the towns of Bourne and Barnstable. And I do rise today to express my strong opposition to the amendments that have been proposed. To pass these proposed amendments as written would create the most substantial impediment yet to the installation of new wind turbines on Cape Cod. By establishing a new DRI threshold for wind turbines, especially at the ridiculously low, or I should say ridiculously short height of 65 feet, you are essentially mandating that every turbine proposal will have to go through full Cape Cod Commission review. Now, I suspect that may be your plan, but it certainly will be a detriment to further turbine installations. Adding to that burden, by requiring a 3,000-foot setback for turbines of 1 megawatt or more, you might as well say goodbye to the town's abilities to erect turbines to reduce their energy costs and their greenhouse gas emissions. While the language of the regulation does suggest that the distance setback requirement may be reduced by evidence of a sound study showing that there are minimal impacts to abutters with a reduced setback, it's certainly my opinion that meeting that standard will prove to be almost impossible. I want to mention just a couple of context and background issues and then get a little bit more specifically into the minimum proposed standards as I move forward here. Certainly, the proposals that have been made will set back what the local communities and the state and the county have been doing for the last decade to promote the generation of clean, renewable energy. There's no question that the restrictiveness of these proposed regulations is completely tied to many of the complaints we've heard recently, particularly with respect to the Falmouth turbines. The creation of these regulations shouldn't be based on the kind of anecdotal information you've heard. Certainly the people who say they've been impacted, that's how they feel about the situation, but it is one turbine in one location, and to create the kind of broad brush regulations that have been proposed, to my way of thinking, is excessive and draconian. I think you also should consider how the state will view these actions. As I mentioned, the state, as everybody knows, for a very, very long time now has been promoting the idea, as have all of the towns in the county, that we want to be developing renewable energy, that we want to make the process more streamlined. And we do that not for frivolous reasons. We do that because there is a concurrence of opinion that global climate change is real, that relying on fossil fuels from Middle East countries is not in this country's best interest. So we do need to move forward with the development of renewable energy. We need to do it appropriately, but we need to do it in a streamlined fashion. With the specifics about the issue of the threshold, I think it's probably no secret that I'm opposed to creating a new DRI threshold. I think the towns, particularly the towns that I'm most familiar with, Bourne and Barnstable, have excellent bylaws in place that are able to deal with and respond to any proposals that come forward. And to create a threshold of 65 feet is just not even arguably prudent, in my opinion. If the whole point of this is to develop something of literally regional impact, an object that is only 65 feet tall can't possibly, even in the loosest definition of what's rational and what's appropriate, be described as a regional impact. So to the degree that you're going to move forward with this, I would certainly advise raising that threshold perhaps to 200 feet if you indeed feel as though you need to move forward. With respect to the noise requirement of 3,000 feet, again, I think it's draconian and excessive. We have example after example of residents who have lived much closer than that distance to turbines, who have expressed no annoyance, no opposition, and no concern. I'm not saying that what the Falmouth folks have enunciated is without merit. What I'm saying is each turbine is different. Each project is different. And so to move forward with something as broad brush stroked as this 3,000-foot setback, I think is completely counterproductive and not supported by the science or the facts, quite frankly. There's other language, of course, that's vague throughout the language, throughout the regulation here. Talk about minimum impacts and how to define those. And throughout the document, again, there are other items that are totally subjective and will need to be explained. Otherwise, the process becomes utterly discretionary. With respect to the decommissioning, I think it's a little unfair and sort of not justified to require a decommissioning bond for turbines, but we don't require decommissioning bonds for other commercial or residential structures or almost any other thing I can think of. So it seems a little bit unreasonable, particularly when the project is just getting off the ground, to require a decommissioning bond. A decommissioning plan makes sense, but a bond early does not. With respect to MPS E1.11, the municipal waiver, I'm a little bit confused by it. It says that the 3,000-foot, well, it says that MPS 1.8 through 1.10 would only apply for turbines, as I read it, greater than 100 kW. I wonder why that doesn't include MPS 1.7, which is the clear area MPS. The other concern I have is it says that shall not apply to one municipal turbine. How about two turbines? The language is just not clear at all. And then finally, with respect to avoiding adverse visual effects, again, totally subjective. New development shall be sited and designed to avoid adverse visual effects to visually sensitive areas. I've not seen any definitional language for that. We're having all kinds of discussions and debate about how the Old Kings Highway relates to wind in its districts and what's appropriate, what's historic as a structure and as a district, and I think this just further confuses the discussion. Ultimately, in conclusion, I would urge you to go back to the drafting table. If you have to create a DRI, which I don't think is justified, at least establish a minimum height threshold that makes some sense, that has some value. If you make every person come in here, every developer, every town come in here for every project, the cost and the time, it is clearly going to make a negative impact on people moving forward with these projects. Finally, I would just say, if you truly believe in renewable energy, and as the Executive Director Paul Nedzwicki said, don't want to become an economic drag on these projects, I would urge you not to pass these amendments as they've been proposed in draft.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Now, we're going to get to comments from the public, and I'm going to call out the names of those people who signed up. I think you can all see by the number of people who are in this room that if we all speak as long as the previous speaker will be here till tomorrow. So I'm going to, and we're very happy that the previous speaker spoke so clearly. But anyway, I would like to have everybody think about trying to keep their comments within 3 minutes. If they're on a point that's particularly important, the chair will allow, allow it to take place. But I think that, and if somebody's said something you want to say already, you can maybe shorten it up saying you agree with, and that sort of thing. So the first person on the list is Neil Anderson.
Thank you very much. My name is Neil Anderson. I live in Falmouth. I am an Energy Star home builder who, over the past 30 years, have designed and built high-performance additions and passive solar homes. I have installed solar hot water systems and photovoltaics with State Rep Matt Patrick. In the early 90s, I was Falmouth's representative with a mission to establish a Barnstable County energy plan. This past spring, a 400-foot tall wind turbine was erected directly across in front of my house. 1/4 mile, 1,320 feet away. At first, although a little frightened because of its size, I was both excited and proud. It is like I had my own turbine right across the street. Green energy at its finest, right there in my front yard. In April, the turbine went into operation. Since that time, our lives have been changed. The turbine has taken over. I have been forced to turn down construction work and have put a halt to my building business. With only the wind turbine on my mind, it seems that every hour of every day it is being dedicated to this wind turbine. I wish I were here to sing its praises, to say how wonderful it is, how well it is working out. But I am not here to talk about green energy or how important all this green energy and energy conservation stuff is. I am here to talk about health. The wind turbine is making us and many of our neighbors ill. It starts with a loss of sleep, but the ear and head pressure, vestibular migraines, headaches, dizziness, and vertigo are all symptoms that we often suffer from. The sensation of increased blood pressure and increase in heart rate is very alarming. And the constant ringing in my ears. I cannot stand the ringing in my ears. Wind turbines emit a low-frequency pulse called aerodynamic amplitude modulation. That, for the most part, is being ignored by the wind industry and by the regulatory boards. This AAM is very, very distressing. I cannot describe the feeling. I know that it does exist, and it is harmful. How do I get this message across? I am asking this board to declare a moratorium on wind turbines, as the town of Falmouth is doing, until the health problems can be addressed and corrected if possible. This current plan is inadequate. Do not rush on this decision. There are too many unanswered questions. As a woman in Falmouth 3 miles away who is distressed from this turbine, please do not ignore these. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Janet Polito. Is that correct?
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Janet Polito. I have a home in Yarmouthport. I want to thank the commission for taking the time to put all the time into this project. And I want to thank them for trying to protect the citizens, the historical value and the natural beauty of Barnstable County. I believe with more time, you will have more evidence of how these turbines do hurt people, and perhaps you will be able to make the rules even more stringent. But I really want to thank you for the time and effort you put in and the great start that's been made.
Thank you. Next is Sheila Bowen.
Good afternoon. My name is Sheila Bowen. I'm a resident of Harwich. I've lived on Cape Cod for 31 years. I am also a member of Windwise Cape Cod and the Harwich Neighborhood Alliance. For the past year, I've been very deeply involved in trying to protect the environment of Cape Cod and trying to protect the people of Cape Cod from these 400 to 500-foot wind turbines that have been introduced into our environment. I was here at the meeting last November when the Assembly of Delegates voted to remand your technical bulletin back to you for more definitive guidelines. And I do appreciate the fact that you're looking at it again and will set forward more stringent guidelines. I'm a little bit concerned about many of them in that, from my viewpoint, they are not strong enough. I was here, as I said, last November and heard the testimony of many of our neighbors in Falmouth, and I don't understand how anyone could listen to those testimonies and neglect them, or to shortchange them, or to say that they are just remarks by people who are disturbed. These are people whose lives have been thoroughly altered by the experience of living near a turbine. One of our members is currently in Australia, and they've been interviewing people in Australia and they have a setback there of 2 kilometers, and there are people there that are 6 and 7 kilometers away, and their health is being adversely affected. These are definitely things that need to be studied. I urge you, please, to continue to protect the environment and the people of Cape Cod. I remember when the commission was formed, and I applauded it. I have loved the Cape all of my life. I do not want to see it to become an industrial energy plant. I know that the governor has said he wants 20% of our energy to come from alternative sources, but this is not the answer. We should not sacrifice Cape Cod to his political aims. So please, please pay attention to the people that speak here tonight. Please research all of the material that's been sent to you. And I also would like to echo Neil and ask you for a moratorium so that this can be studied thoroughly. Mr. Nedzwicki, I would also like to ask you when you will be calling the commission that will include citizens of the Cape. Do you have a time when that will be called together?
Would be a technical advisory group as we compile the technical bulletin, where we look more specifically at acoustical engineering components of this. Generally, we don't. I mean, we haven't in the past. We're not going to go out and hire those kind of specialists to come in until we have the authority and the jurisdiction to regulate in a certain area. That's why the standards come before the technical bulletins. If the ordinance were passed today and were adopted by the Assembly sometime in February, then I would imagine by March we would put that committee together.
Okay.
But if the standards don't go forward, then there's some real doubt as to whether we ultimately are going to have any jurisdiction over this.
It was my understanding in studies with WESRA, the wind energy, okay, thank you. With the WESRA bill that is now going to be reintroduced, I'm certain, for the term of 2011, that the Cape Cod Commission was specifically cited as being the body that would be responsible for mitigating questions on turbines. So I would think that, I would like to think that we can stop it again, but I think it probably will go through. So that would certainly give you the jurisdiction. Is that correct?
It would give us the jurisdiction, ma'am, but without standards, we'd have nothing to apply. So we would be, and again, the situation I tried to explain when we started out the hearing of having projects trip Cape Cod Commission review thresholds, but having no standards in the regional policy plan to apply, having only the local bylaws in the towns and other insufficient regulations to apply. And so I know it's difficult to conceive of, but we need standards in order to be part of this discussion. And part of the difficulty here is there seems to be a perception out there that you're only going to have one bite at the apple. That if we put standards in place today and we find out something in 6 months, that we're not going to come back and change the standards. And that's of great concern to me, because it shows a real lack of trust in what we're trying to do here.
You actually just answered another question that I had, because that actually,
Okay.
I do find that very reassuring. So from what you have stated, if the standards that are proposed were accepted and you call together...
You had one more question? Because we're getting...
I'm just clarifying right now.
Okay.
And I do think we should have equal time as tax-paying citizens to representatives of organizations and government bodies. I hope that we will not be shortchanged because the government officials spoke longer.
They certainly did.
Yes, they did. And I think we have the same right. We have the same right to speak. So I would just like to clarify that what you said, that if you were to study this more thoroughly and to find that, for instance, 3,000 feet is not adequate protection to the health of the residents of Cape Cod, you would go back and change it.
And I want to clarify, we have just issued a technical report for offshore wind that we've been working on for a number of months as part of the offshore DCPC discussion. We expect to produce ordinances compliant with the Ocean Management Plan in a June, July, August timeframe. Originally, when we brought forward the 3 standards, that was to close that loophole so that if we got projects that triggered review, whether by the Wind Energy Reform Siting Act or because of other Cape Cod Commission thresholds, that we'd have standards to review them by. That was shot down as insufficient, leaving us completely unprotected and unprepared for jurisdiction that's already been granted to us going forward. And it was done because people, the only reason I can figure out why they were rejected is they felt that it was you're only going to have one bite at the apple. The Cape Cod Commission is an evolving process. Our regulations have to evolve with the reality that we see out there in order to meet our fiduciary responsibility to protect those things in the Act that we're charged with protecting. So that's why it was so alarming to me that those standards didn't go through, and we were forced to have this discussion, which probably could have taken another 6 months and tracked the ocean discussion that we're having. But we were sort of forced with the absolute denial of those 3 reasonable standards that were put forward in November into a more aggressive stance and having to respond to the Assembly. And that's why we're in this predicament that we're in. But I can guarantee you, ma'am, as with any other standard that we have, it is not one bite at the apple. If a standard doesn't work, we're going to fix it. And we'll have a public process associated with that.
And you would find if it doesn't work just from your study, not based on another incidents like we have in Falmouth. I mean, we do not have to jeopardize another town before you're convinced.
This is not about Falmouth. This is about the Commission's role as a regional planning agency engaged in trying to develop regulations that appropriately protect everybody in the jurisdiction. Now, we have to work in concert with the Assembly of Delegates, with town managers and town administrators. I heard from the energy coordinator from Barnstable and Bourne today that he spoke strongly in opposition of any of these regulations. His members on the Assembly of Delegates last month spoke strongly in the other direction.
Right.
So we're trying to make sense. Who speaks for the town?
Well, I also want to refute a few things that Mr. Elrick said. I mean, he...
And I apologize, because this shouldn't really be a debate. We want to make enough time to hear from everybody. But you ask questions that I think that I've read the emails, and I'm lucky I have some thick skin, but I think there is a misunderstanding of the process out there.
I believe that's true.
And what we're trying to do. So I'm glad that you asked that question, and I hope that we clarified that for you.
I can confirm that I will be at your forum on January 29th, and I know many people are going, because this has certainly raised our desire to understand county government to a higher degree than we have. And I also want to reiterate that I trust the Cape Cod Commission implicitly. As I say, I was very pleased when you were formed. I understand the need for your organization, and I do think it should be on a county basis because, for instance, the watershed in Brewster is shared with Harwich, and that is endangered by Turbine. So living in Harwich, I feel that we are at risk. There are people in Harwich that will be affected by the sound that comes from the Brewster turbines if they go up. Sound will not stop at town line. So I do think we need a regional approach. And I appreciate your time and your consideration. Thank you.